Okay, back again with me is Jerry Brainum, expert on everything nutrition, everything exercise. I'm setting him up now so well. Everything you could ever imagine, just check out that YouTube channel of his, and you'll find out why I have him on the program every so often, because he is the best, the best. And we're 3,000 miles away, Jer, but it
Yeah,
seems as though you're right in my living room right now.
yeah, I know, I know. It's the wonders of technology.
It's a beautiful thing. It really is. I
Yeah,
never thought we'd get to this point where you can actually see the person and
yeah,
speak to the person. It used to be science fiction.
right. In fact, as a kid, I can tell you a funny story. I remember attending, now this really dates me. I attended the 1964 World's Fair in New York.
Yes,
Remember that big globe thing they
I
had?
do. Yeah,
But they had it I think it was called Bell Telephone at that time. They
really.
they had an exhibit where they talked about the communication of the future. You went into a little booth and you could dial somebody up and it would show you how you could do exactly what we're doing here. You could talk to them and see them at the same time live. I remember thinking, wow, this is going to be great. I thought it'd be the way they set it up, you'd think it would happen in like 2 years.
Yeah,
It took like
it took a while.
it took like
It
60
took a
years.
long while.
Yeah, about like 50, 60 years before it actually happened.
If you go to that site, that same site,
Yeah.
was that Queens?
Queens, yeah. It was
If you go to Queens, you can still see remnants of all that stuff. The globe,
oh yeah,
everything's still
I
there.
know, I know, I know. I see that sometimes in videos.
It's actually a very interesting spot. I
Yeah.
have to start out on a sour, morbid note. I'll say morbid, and I hate to do this, but let's get the heavy stuff out of the way. Then we'll talk about some fun stuff.
Okay.
Uh, so many bodybuilders are dying.
Uh,
There you go,
right.
and they're not 50 years old yet. You know, the Franco Colombo dies when he's 80 something.
Oh, 78.
You take it with a grain of salt because the guy spent 8 decades on the planet. But when these guys are dying at 40 and 50, you worry about that.
Mhm.
What do you think is, I mean, drugs, lifestyle, what's going on now that didn't go on before where you have so many deaths?
Well, I did an article on this exact topic in my Applied Metabolics publication, www.appliedmetabolics.com. I did an extremely in-depth examination of what's going on with these guys, why they're dying. I basically went over every possibility, everything ranging from drug use to mental problems to even suicide was all included in that article. But to make a long story short, a lot of times, a lot of it's related to, let's say, heavy anabolic drug use. Now you mentioned Franco Colombo. Now, all right, it's true. He died at 78. He was in visiting Italy. He's from Sardinia island off Italy. He was visiting his people back there. He was swimming, and the story is he died. He suddenly had a heart attack, and this you don't know whether he either drowned or died from the heart attack. It's still kind of unclear. But here's the interesting thing about him. He comes from a country, Sardinia, which is considered what they call a blue zone. In other words, most of the men there have excellent longevity. They often live to over 100 years of age. People who see the movie Pumping Iron, which was filmed around
Yeah.
1975 or so, there's a scene where Franco is lifting a car up on the street there in Italy, the small car. He actually lifts it up to move the car. These two old people who are overlooking it, that's his parents. His father was like 98 years old at the time. Here's my point. I believe, this is my theory, it's a hypothesis on my part. I think Franco could have probably lived to at least 100, but he did a couple of things wrong. And this relates to what you're asking me.
Uh-huh.
Franco not only used steroid. Now, you have to understand the era that Franco and Arnold, his buddy Arnold, competed in, their anabolic drug use was nothing compared to what the guys use today. Nothing. They used a certain amount of steroids. They didn't use growth hormone. They didn't use insulin, but he still used steroids, right?
Mhm.
That's one thing. The second thing is that uh, Franco and Arnold loved to smoke these big cigars.
Yep.
And Franco smoked like several cigars a day. And I didn't find this out till I went to his memorial that Arnold put on after he died. A close friend of Franco told me Franco had his own winery and he used to drink like a quart of wine a day. I mean, he loved drinking wine. Now you combine the two: wine, excessive alcohol intake, smoking cigars, right?
Uh-huh.
Plus Franco didn't hardly train towards the end of his life. I mean, if you look at him in person, as I seen a couple of years before he died, you would never know this guy was a two-time Mr. Olympia. He's just a little guy, you know. But the thing is, I believe he cut short his, let's say, genetic gift by indulging in bad habits, meaning the smoking, the cigars, and the drinking. I think he probably, because of his genetics, the studies show that some of the men in Sardinia have this little genetic thing that allows them to, live. Also, another thing about the Sardinians and people in blue zones is the one commonality most of them have, besides certain, let's say, a tendency to follow certain types of diets, is that they never stop moving. These people that live a long time, even if you separate, they say that the genetics for longevity is only like 20% of your longevity is related to genetics, right?
Mm-hmm.
People in the blue zones, they stay active, like in Okinawa and Loma Linda, all these places. They don't sit around. I mean, all the way to 80s, 90s, not necessarily bodybuilders.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them might even not engage in resistance training, but they're always moving.
Mm-hmm.
That's a key point, because the older you get, the more important it is to keep active. You got to keep moving. The body is based on use it or lose it principle. Whatever you don't use, whether it's your muscles or your brain, it goes. That's the way it works. Now, as far as the bodybuilders go, a lot of them have to. My research showed that some of them just died simply because they overdid the drugs. These are some of the younger guys. The problem with steroids, and I've written this many times, is that you never know. No one could really predict. There's no doctor. Nobody can predict what's going to happen when you take especially large doses for extended times. A lot of people have kind of like time bombs in their body, so to speak. They might have, let's say, genetic abnormalities with their heart. They don't know they have it. There's no symptoms, but or blood clotting problems, when they get on the high dose steroids, these are brought to the fore, and it hits them like a punch from Mike Tyson. I mean, suddenly they drop dead. That happens a lot. That
You set it up perfectly though, Jerry. You just said you're, I guess, you're set up. You have something that's abnormal, and the drugs just enhance this difficulty. And so you have a time bomb. That
right.
So right about that. A guy that comes to mind is Doug Brignoli.
Doug, there you go. Now, Doug,
Very nice guy, been on this program. Great guy. Shocked the hell out of me when it happened.
well, Doug really shocked me also because he's a good friend of mine, and I used to see him all the time. To me, this guy at over 60 years old was the picture of health. No body fat on the guy at all. At the time of his death, he was planning to pose at a contest. He was still going to compete at 62 years old in some sort of Masters Mr. Universe contest. He seemed to do everything right. We talked about diet.
Yeah.
And that's what he talked about with me mainly. I mean, how he adjusted his diet because he found out he had insulin problems. I mean, he was doing everything right. But this is a good example. It's good that you brought him up, of a guy who had some sort of genetic problem that caught up with him, where he just literally dropped dead at 62. He had no obvious risk factors, but something was going on internally that that did him in. And a lot of people say, well, it was probably the steroid. Look, let's assume that Doug, it's common for men his age to be on testosterone replacement therapy. I don't really know whether Doug was on TRT or not. I don't. But let me put it this way. The dose of TRT that's normally given would never have caused a person like him to drop dead, especially with his conditioning. It had to be something inherently in his body that, that just hit him.
Yeah.
He didn't really do anything wrong. The only thing that he could have done that might have prevented his premature death would be to undergo some really deep, let's say, cardiac tests, tests for things, what I call off the road blood tests that they normally don't test for. When you go for lab tests, let's say blood lipids, total cholesterol, there's certain other factors, fibrinogen, something called lipoprotein small a. These things are not normally also apoprotein B. These are not normally tested for. But if you test for them and they're abnormal, you could then take steps, because these things are going to kill you.
Yeah.
They're going to kill you for sure. you have to take step, and also the size of LDL particles, low density lipoprotein. Again, these are not tested for a normal blood test. You go to the average doctor, he'll give you a blood nipple test. Hey, Ralph, your cholesterol's good, your triglycerides are fine. You know, take care. You're doing everything. That doesn't tell you shit, to put it bluntly.
Yeah,
You
I
can
know.
still have these cardiac risk factors that'll, like I say, they're basically time bombs. They'll kill you. They
Well,
will.
you're worrying me, and those things come out of pocket.
Yes,
That's the problem. People have to pay for those things.
that's
You
right.
go to what they call longevity center, or they have something my way, Princeton Longevity Center, where you go head to toe, Jared.
Right,
Everything tested, top to bottom, and then they give you a clean bill of health. You know you've had every
right.
out of the box type
Sure.
test done, and you can go out there feeling that you did
Yeah.
something. But Doug used to. Well, here's the other thing about him. He took the COVID vaccine, and people were saying, because the rumors will start that he died for that reason. No, no, no. He had a genetic defect. I don't
Yeah.
know the details. You lined it up for
I
me.
know the
That's
details.
that he had the propensity to pass away if something just went wrong at the wrong time.
Well, in Doug's case, that's the thing that really angered me about Doug, because right after he died, people on Facebook, these morons, they printed a statement that Doug had made over a year before, where he said he just had the COVID vaccine, and he says, if I drop dead, you'll know that the COVID vaccine
Yeah,
is.
I remember that.
He didn't drop dead, but people took that statement out of context. The man dies over a year later, and some of these idiots said it was the COVID vaccine, which makes no sense whatsoever. Because if you know anything about the COVID, this is where these anti-vaxxers are so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
If you study the let's say the physiology of the COVID-19 vaccine, it basically primes your immune system to recognize and deal with the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. Unfortunately, the virus mutates all the time. So, unfortunately, vaccines aren't as effective. You have to have boosters, blah, blah, blah. The point being, though, the COVID-19 does its thing, goes in, it primes your immune system. That's why people, when they get the COVID shot, they often get symptoms like fatigue, and they get tired.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on is that the body is going through a dress rehearsal. That's what would happen if they actually got COVID-19. But the body is just setting up your immune system to deal with it. It's setting up the defenses. But the point I'm trying to make is after 2 weeks, the COVID-19 is gone. It's out of your body. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't get into your cells. And there's no way it can cause a heart attack like Doug got a year later. That's completely absurd. That makes
especially a year after the fact. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and a lot of the cases, there's something called the VAERS reporting system.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these anti-vaxxers, when they talk about the dangers of the vaccine, they go by that. Now, the VAERS is a voluntary reporting system set up by the government where you, me, anybody, you could go on there right now, Ralph. You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you this, but trust me, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, I took the vaccine, and a day later, my dog, who was healthy, dropped dead. It had to be because of, and they will list that. In other words, nobody checks it out. Nobody confirms it. You could say anything. My uncle had I hear this a lot. My uncle took the vaccine, and 3 days later, he had a heart attack. It had nothing to do with the vaccine. Nothing to do with this guy whoever he was set up to have the heart attack, and it was strictly the vaccine cannot cause a heart attack. What it can cause, in less than 1% of men between 18 and 24, they get something called myocarditis,
yes.
which is an inflammation of the heart. It sounds bad. It's very mild. It doesn't cause any permanent heart damage, and it's easily treated. That's the only heart problem they've ever traced to the COVID. And that happens it's something like 0.1% of men for some reason, it happens between young men between 18 and 24.
It's very rare.
Very rare.
It rarely happens. Dougie was such a good guy, and he had such a unique approach to bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And what a physique. He was born the same year I was born, 1960. So we had a lot in common. He was a great guy. And, we rest in peace, Doug. We hold your legacy. We don't bullshit on this program. We tell the truth because disparaging somebody when he's dead and he can't speak for himself is the coward's way out,
I
in
hate
my
that.
mind, anyway.
I hate that. See, I get in arguments with people online because, I kind of have a pretty good knowledge of the history of bodybuilding.
Hmm.
Have some of the, maybe you know these names, Ralph. For example, Reg Park, Steve
Oh,
Reeves.
sure.
Reg Park was, one of four-time Mr. Universe in the 50s and 60s. Of course, Steve Reeves was a 1947 Mr. America, 1950 Mr. Universe, where he beat Reg Park. But, these guys today, these young, whatever they call millennium, I don't know what they call themselves.
Yeah.
They get online and they accuse people like Reg Park and Steve Reeves of using steroids because these guys, they cannot believe that these guys attain those physiques without using any drugs.
Yeah.
They have no concept of what it means to train hard, diet. I mean, Steve Reeves used to tell people, even when he was 70 years old, he says, the thing I'm proudest about related to bodybuilding is my waist size never changed from the time I says, I always maintained a 29-inch waist all the way up to now. In other words, he was very conscientious of his food intake, his activity level. He developed something called power walking to keep his body fat low. These guys completely overlook that stuff. And because they don't want to put in the work themselves, they don't want to put in the effort, or they might not have the genetics to equal the development that these guys attain, they have to rip them apart. And the part that gets me, as you just pointed out, these guys aren't alive to defend themselves. So
Yeah.
I defend them. I take it upon myself to say exactly what I just told you. You guys, this is what I tell them. You're basically full of crap. You're lazy. You got bad genetics. Don't put these guys down because you can't, equal what they showed.
Well, you're so right. Keyboard warriors, they're out
Yeah.
there, bang, 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 bang. No responsibility whatsoever. It brings me to something right now. You brought to mind this point. We go to the internet for expertise now. This guy has a pretty good physique. God knows what he's doing to get that physique, but he's automatically, Jer, going to be the expert to tell you what to do and how to train, how to eat, so on and so forth. What do you think of the misinformation that's out there, and should it be regulated?
Well, as you point out, anyone can anoint themselves an expert. In other words, you can go on Instagram, you can make videos on YouTube, and you could have no knowledge whatsoever. In fact, in my opinion, I've seen a lot of the videos on YouTube. I'm not big on the other one. What's it called?
TikTok,
TikTok,
Instagram.
Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, I look at it occasionally, but they have the same guys on there. In other words, these guys are nothing basically. They use like little they use technology to make themselves look better than they actually are. Because I've seen some of these people. I was in the gym one day, and this skinny kid was working out, and somebody was filming him.
Mm-hmm.
I said to this other guy, I said, "Why are they filming this guy? He's got 14-inch arms. All he has is abdominal." I said, "Guys, you can go down to the beach and see guys with more muscle and will never touch the weight." Oh, that guy has 2 million followers on Instagram. I said, "You got to be kidding." And he whips and the guy takes out his phone. He shows me pictures of the guy in Instagram. The photos of the same guy 10 feet away from me looks like he weighs 140. Now he's on Instagram. Suddenly he weighs 220 and looks like a Mr. Olympia. It was Photoshop. It was all bullshit.
Yeah.
So these young guys can oh, let me turn off my phone. Hold on a second.
It's okay.
Hold on.
Jerry Brainum with me. We're going to keep him on as long as you can stand it. And
I should have turned off the phone.
we're going gangbusters here because we're talking about bodybuilding and overall health, everything in general, actually.
So, in other words, these guys, they get a big following because the young guys their age can relate to them, and they look at the fake images of these people, and they say that, and they more or less idolize them, and they listen to them and they follow what they say. Now, that would be okay if what these so-called influencers said was accurate and good. I'd say, okay, no problem, right? They're phony, they're fake, but at least they're giving out good information. The problem is they're not even out giving out what they say is often ridiculous. They don't know how to train. When they show exercises, they have poor form. They don't know anything. It's the classic cliche of the blind leading the blind. That's
And
what
there
I,
are some phenoms out there, Jared. The rare exception to the rule, they're really outstanding.
oh,
And
yeah,
I say to myself, this guy's the real deal. And if you notice, he's really basic in his training.
right,
He's not doing some cockamamie, newfangled, trendy thing. He's doing what we've been doing for
yeah,
40 some odd, 50 some odd years. You know,
right.
that's what he's doing. There's no real secret.
Oh,
Well, yeah, there's no real secret to building muscle. You just have to stimulate that muscle to grow. You tear down those fibers, and of course, the body rejuvenates. And
right.
this is the process that goes on. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but it gets done no matter what kind of a movement or resistance you put on it, right? I mean, a push-up is sometimes as good as a bench press or an
Right,
incline press or a fly, right?
right, right. That's right. And it's true. Some of the influencers are in great shape. They look like, most of them, as far as I know, they don't compete bodybuilding. They never really test themselves
They
against
just
anybody.
have a couple of million followers,
Right,
and
they
that
have
pays the
a
rent.
lot, exactly. They're making, what I've told, they're making a lot of money. But you have to understand, a lot of these guys, as we were talking about earlier, they're also genetically gifted. In other words, it's not anything special, as you point out. They're not doing anything special. They have no secrets, but they have a genetically improved response to building muscle, to the point where somebody trying to duplicate what they do in the way of training and diet would look nothing like them. I always write about how you go way back to Arnold at the original Gold's Gym. I
Mhm.
trained with him many times, and I saw him train with about 14 different guys over the years in his bodybuilding heyday. And I can tell you, not one of them ever came close to equaling Arnold's physical development. And some of these guys were top guys, Ed Corney, these
Mhm.
were top bodybuilders, but they just didn't duplicate, let's say, the rate of progress that Arnold made, because Arnold was Arnold. He has his own genetics. And these guys did the same exercises, often used the same weight, same number of repetitions. They even ate the same food as Arnold. And Arnold was generous with his steroid program. He told them exactly what he used, and they even used the same program. Yet none of them equaled Arnold. None of them.
Well,
Because
a genetic freak would be an understatement. But when you get these guys, though, Jerry, like that, they're one in a million. You know,
exactly,
they don't come along every day, and we all can't be that way. But you know, something. My father, I'm built like my father. This is a prime example. My father was a construction worker outside, never lifted a weight. When I used to lift weights, he used to say to me, Jerry, he'd say, "What the hell are we building here? You're eating me out of house and home." And I said, well, this is what I'm trying to not be a skinny baseball player. I'm trying to be a well-built baseball player. So the scouts look at me. That was my main priority back then. And then he really took to it. But what I'm saying is, I have thin legs. The Romeo's my last name. They all had thin legs. I have broad shoulders. On the upper body was always easy. The legs were always difficult. That's where I'm coming from. Why? Genetics.
exactly. That's exactly right. That's why bodybuilding is an extremely genetic sport.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult when I say genetic, you have to have certain attributes to get to be, you could be a successful bodybuilder at a lower level.
Mhm.
You could win a couple of local contests, maybe a state but if you get to the elite level, let's say professional bodybuilding, you have to have certain genetic attributes. Otherwise, you have no chance. And taking drugs, it's not going to make any difference. You have to have the basic, let's say, a tendency to smaller waist, wider shoulders, more responsive to exercise, this type of thing. I mean, that's something that's built into the genes. There's not, but the interesting thing is, a lot of times you really can't tell when somebody starts lifting weights,
Mhm.
unless he's what they call a pure mesomorph, meaning he's naturally muscular. A lot of times you get thin guys and you look at him and say, well, this guy, he's not going to ever really get anywhere. And, you get a guy like, there's a guy named Flex Wheeler,
Mhm.
this pro bodybuilder.
Sure.
If you ever look at photos of him when he started, he was literally skinny as a rail. I mean, this guy was a skeleton, and the amount of muscle, whatever he took steroids, whatever he did, I mean, he completely metamorphosized himself into this gigantic bodybuilder. And then you have a guy like Larry Scott, who was the first winner of the Mr. Olympia contest. He won
Yeah.
it twice, 65 and 66. This guy had terrible genetics of bodybuilding, narrow shoulders, wide waist, no back development, poor leg development, not poor, but mediocre leg.
Mhm.
81 two Mr. Olympia titles. How did he do that? What he did is he cashed in on the genetic gifts he did have. What were his genetic gifts? His shoulders and arms, which were literally unbeatable in his era. His shoulders and arms, especially his bicep, was absolutely incredible. Nobody came close. So I saw the man compete. I go way back.
Uh-huh.
And when he posed, every pose he did, he emphasized
All about the arms and
it was
shoulders.
all about the arms, all about the arms. He kept and the
Well,
judge,
the Scott curl, that's his
yeah, that's exactly. So in other words, the judges were so mesmerized by the literally unbeatable arms he had, non-frail arms, that they would literally ignore his leg and back development, and he'd win.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's
Well,
one.
yeah,
So this,
you see how it is. You mentioned judges. Now, when one judge will see mass and fall in love. They love that kind of thing. One guy will see Frank Zane type aesthetics, and then they'll say, that's my ideal of a perfect body.
right.
I think the truth is somewhere in between. How in a sport that's so subjective, how can you be fair?
Well, I'll tell you how you be fair. I judged a few contests myself. I judged some of the earliest female bodybuilding contests. They asked me to judge, right? And I said, okay, I'd never really dealt with a female bodybuilder. I mean, I grew up thinking that men were supposed to have muscles and women weren't. So how do you judge a female bodybuilder? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
And the answer I was given was just judge her like you would judge a man. I said, what do you mean? In other words, I said, look for muscularity, balance, and symmetry. And that's what I did. I remember there was one, it's kind of a funny story. There was one contest I judged where the girl who I picked for first, the woman I picked for first, she met the criteria. She had muscularity. Remember, they were much smaller then.
Yeah.
They didn't look like they did later on,
Yeah.
where you couldn't tell the difference between men and women.
Much better.
They looked like women, but she was athletic looking. She was balanced, but she happened to be facially the ugliest woman in the contest. She was what Arnold used to call a dog's dinner. She was
Sounds like Arnold.
Yeah, that was his expression for ugly women. He called them a dog's dinner. But I mean, she was not facially attractive. So
right.
when I picked her as first, the other judges said, Jerry, what are you, crazy? She's a pig. What are you going to? I said, wait a minute. Are we judging? Is this Miss America here? We're judging a bodybuilding contest. Right. Forget her face.
Should be from the neck down.
I said, she has the best female bodybuilder body. I'm giving her first place. They had her at last because she was such dog ugly. So what?
Yeah, well, the two that now, for instance, Carla Dunlap, this is going back.
Yeah.
Rachel McClish. When I started buying the magazines, those were the two.
Right.
And, Rachel was attractive. Carla, I guess she was attractive, but a little bit more, I guess, masculine, you could say.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, Rachel got the press because she was more the, I guess, what you would assume that a nice-looking woman would be. And there was nothing wrong with Carla Dunlap, but this is the way it went in that era. But now, has it changed? I haven't looked in on the females in a long time because I was never into female bodybuilding. How is it these days?
Well, what happened was female bodybuilding reached its peak. If you look at the history of it, the first, I think Rachel, if I remember correctly, was actually the first Miss Olympia in 1980, if I remember.
I think you're right.
She won it twice. And female bodybuilding evolved. Like I say, the first female body, there was a woman named Lisa Lyon.
Yes.
Away recently, who I knew very well. She was extremely feminine looking, but
I think she just passed away.
Yeah, she just passed away, but nevertheless, she was athletic, not big, but very athletic looking. She did happen to have a very pretty face, but that's besides the point. But female bodybuilding evolved just like the male bodybuilding did, where the female bodybuilders started to get more and more muscular. And the last, if you want to call it, feminine version of Miss Olympia was probably, it's a toss-up. I would say it was Corey Everson.
Yes.
Linda Murray, who followed Corey, Linda Murray, she was kind of a hybrid. She still had a lot of femininity left, but she started to get the big delts. She started to get a lot of the male characteristics. She still looked like a woman, though. However, after Linda, things got really bad. I don't want to use the word bad. Let's say things really got extreme where the women got into heavy drug use, and they got not so much huge. They weren't equal to the male bodybuilders who were like up to 270 pounds or something, but their muscularity was intense. I mean, these women had. I compete as a bodybuilder. They would have destroyed me in every contest I entered. I could never beat these female, but the way they looked, you know. So what happened was it reached its peak around 2014. Female bodybuilding, people didn't like the look. It had a little cult following. With my friend Don Ross, he used to call him schmoes. A lot of these guys, they don't even they have a fetish for big female bodybuilders. They used to pay these women to wrestle and beat them up, slap them. That was the cult following of female body. But most men, even male bodybuilders, and certainly most women, were repulsed by the look of extreme female muscle, and it got so unpopular that the IFBB dumped the Miss Olympia contest back in 2014, right? So, and what happened was it was dormant for a couple of years, and then this guy whose name I can't recall, he a millionaire from Arizona, he bought all the Weider Empire, he bought the magazines, he bought the Mr. Olympia. Turns out he also has a fetish for hardcore female bodybuilders. He married one of them. When they closed down the Miss Olympia, he started his own female bodybuilding contest, which he called the Wings of Strength. It was basically for the hardcore female bodybuilders. It gave them something to compete in because the Miss Olympia was gone.
Yeah.
But when he bought the Weider Empire, one of the first things he did, he reconstituted the Miss Olympia. So now we're back to the same thing but recognizing the unpopularity of extreme female muscle. In the meantime, the governing federation, if you want to call it that, the IFBB, they established other contests for women that emphasize more femininity rather than pure muscle. So you have bikini, you have what else? Bikini. I can't remember even the names.
So many categories with the men on the men's side too.
Yeah, I don't know whether physique is still hardcore women's, but I can't remember. There's about 3 different divisions. But the point is that at least besides the hardcore female bodybuilding, the other 3, you still have to show femininity. In other words, if a woman competes in those other divisions and she has a hardcore female bodybuilder look, she's at the bottom. She places last, and they warn her. It says right there in the rules, if you show too much muscularity, you're going to be placed low. You're going to be you're going to get less points. So they open divisions. Those divisions, by the way, like bikini and some of these other ones, have brought back a lot of the popularity that the original original Miss Olympia had. In other words, some of the girls, they're still more muscular than, let's say, Rachel or Lisa Lyon, but they still show femininity. And now I got a big laugh. They have the newest division in female, if you want to call it female bodybuilding, is called the wellness division. And I couldn't understand what this was. When I first saw the contest, I saw a video. They had these absolutely drop-dead gorgeous women. I mean, they were very pretty, very feminine, extremely shapely. I mean, there's no doubt that they look like women, except the one thing that I noticed that caught my eye was when they posed, they turned to the back and they kept sticking their butt out. And I started to notice that their gluteus, if you want to call it that, was so well developed that when they stood to the front, you could still see their glutes. That's how big they were. But they weren't fat. And then I suddenly dawned on me. I said, "My God, those are glute implants."
Yeah, implants.
And it turns out, and what confirmed it was when they started to say the countries where these women were from, the majority were from Brazil. Brazil is the home.
That's the capital of the implants.
Exactly. That's where glute implants started. These girls, I mean, they undeniably look like women. But I said to myself, why do they call it wellness? And they seem to be judged entirely on their glutes.
Yeah, that's the glute obsession on both sides is a little ridiculous. The striated glutes, where they have the posing trunks like strings, and you can see this is the men's side too. That's kind of ridiculous. And also the categories on the men's side, Jer. Think about how they pose with the long shorts. What do you call what category is that?
It's called men's physique, I think they call it.
Yeah, something like that. Now, these guys never have to squat in their lives because they just develop the upper body they haven't made because you got these beach shorts on and everything is fine. And
And
what do you make of that? Because there has to be a yearning for something more aesthetic than these big,
yeah,
humongous rhinoceroses that are on stage all the time. There has to be. That's why these other categories are created, right?
well, you're right. That men's physique was a reaction to the hardcore male bodybuilding, which just like the female bodybuilding had gotten out of hand. We had these behemoths, these guys who were like, 5'10",
Yeah,
like Ronnie Coleman, 5'10", weighing 300 pounds on stage.
yeah,
And who could relate to that? I mean,
yeah.
nobody. I mean, it's like one in 10 billion. So they said this is going to discourage men from competing, and also you have to understand, and this is going to maybe get me in trouble, but I'm going to say it
Say it
anyway.
anyway.
The sole motivation of these promoters and these federations is to make money. That's it. And they realize that if they focused on the hardcore male bodybuilding, it's going to be like what's
A
that word?
click.
A kind of a click sport. It's only going to attract a certain number of hardcore. So they needed to broaden the audience or the participation. So they created divisions like the men's physique. As you point out, they wear these board shorts or surfer shorts. No, you can't see their thigh development. And the thing is, that's a funny thing about that. It shows you how bodybuilding appearance constantly evolves. Because when they first started the men's physique, the guys looked like athletic guys, all had nice abdominal development, small waist, but relatively small arms. I mean,
Hmm.
they look like maybe guys that had trained for maybe 2 years, and
Yeah.
you couldn't see their thigh development, as you point out. Most of them had skinny calves. They didn't have big calves either. But this is the interesting thing. Over the last couple of years, they've also gotten bigger and bigger. And the funny thing is, there's a weight limitation. In other words, these guys, it's in the rules, just like for the female bodybuilders. The men's physique, if they get too big, if they start to look like the hardcore male bodybuilders, they get marked down and they'll play
Mm.
smaller. I've seen contests, again, videos. I don't go to them, but I've seen videos where I watch these men's physique where the one guy, I say, well, this is the winner. Look at this guy's physique. He's great.
Mhm.
He's beaten by a guy who has literally half as much muscle as him.
Yeah.
And I say, how is this? And then I remembered they mark down the guys who are big. They mark them down.
That's the thing about the criteria. What is the criteria? What makes a good physique? It's subjective. One guy says yes to the mass, one guy says too much mass.
Right.
So it's that's why it's always been a rough sport where people think they get ripped off.
Yeah.
The classic 1980
Yeah.
Olympia where you the controversy. Arnold not in good shape. He wins anyway. Politics comes into play all the time. I'll ask you a question. This is from a personal standpoint. I like to train. It's kind of like a good mood elevator for me. I even in the winter months here on the East Coast, I can stay motivated because I can go train and feel good.
Right.
But I get overtrained. I get smaller. I shrink. Other people my age get heavy. I get skinny.
Right.
How do I keep exercising every day? Do something every day without overdoing it and kind of reducing my muscle size. Is there a way?
Are you talking about when you say every day, 7 days a week?
Yeah, well, I do something every day. I don't go in there and pound the same body part time and time again, but I do something every day. Right? For instance, I'll do a cross training routine one day where I'm emphasizing cardio, going to the weight work, back to the cardio, that kind of thing. The next day will be a more hardcore standard bodybuilding routine. The next day I'll do something else athletic. I want to do something every day. How can I do something every day and not become so tired and overtrained? Is there a way?
Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. Actually, it's a good system because you're not overtaxing the body by doing that. For example, if you try to train your arms 6 days a week, you might initially get some arm growth, but then your arms are not going to recover, and you're either going to stay the same or you might actually lose arm size. The fact that you're kind of alternating these workouts, you're hitting like different, your muscles are being trained differently. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, in your case, since you say you're not making gains, you'd have to look to rather than assuming that you're not training like 8 hours a day. I'm assuming that,
No,
or maybe what, an hour,
an
45 minutes.
hour at the most.
So you're not really overtraining in terms of volume, let's say, right?
Sometimes a couple of training sessions. I'll go running in the morning, weight training in the mid-afternoon.
That's fine. In fact, that's not a bad idea, actually, because there's some evidence showing that if you combine aerobic training with, let's say, leg training, the aerobic training, if you do it right after the leg training, you'll inhibit muscle gains in the legs. But that's kind of controversial. My point being that I don't think there's anything wrong with the volume. I think it's a good idea that you're alternating the workouts. In your case, you have to look to nutrition. In other words, what you might have to do is increase your calories, increase your protein, to make up for the fact that you're training more frequent. If you do that, you should still be at, in other words, you're going to have to align your calorie intake with your activity level. In other words, you might be burning so many calories by training every day, especially if you're not eating and commensurate with that activity, that you're either staying the same or you stay thin, like you say, because you're basically burning it all off, especially if you have a higher metabolism. So you have to look to nutrition. I'd say to increase it. And when I say increase calories, I'm not saying you should go get a bucket of KFC chicken or
Yeah.
crap like that. I'm talking about good calories and mainly focusing on let's say, protein, with good carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables, high fiber, no refined carbohydrates, focus on good fats, like extra virgin of olive oil, monounsaturated fat, keep the saturated fats fairly low because they don't really do anything for you, you know what I mean? But other than they do help support testosterone, but you only need 10% of your calories to do that. So you don't really need.
When I do increase, chair, I feel sluggish. Here's the problem, and I don't eat that much per sitting.
Yeah.
I'll eat maybe four, 5 meals instead of four meals instead of three. I can't eat rice. I can't eat oatmeal anymore. I go right to sleep. Ask my wife; she'll tell you, right, babe?
You know what?
Every time I eat now, oatmeal is a staple for bodybuilders.
Yeah.
I don't feel well on oatmeal anymore.
Yeah.
When I was younger, oatmeal. If I didn't have that Quaker Oats bucket in my house, I had to run to the store and get it. I can't eat that kind of thing anymore. I do much better on fruit and vegetables, but the
Yeah.
less I eat, the better I feel.
Yeah.
I actually fast. I train in the morning on an empty stomach most days. I don't eat my first meal until about 11:30, 12 o'clock. Am I doing myself harm?
No, not at all. But I'll tell you the reason you feel tired after eating those foods is because those are carbohydrate foods that stimulate a slightly bigger insulin response.
Insulin.
Now, it's not insulin itself that's making you tired. It's the fact that insulin stimulates a brain neurotransmitter called serotonin that's produced from the amino acid tryptophan. Now, serotonin has a very, very relaxing effect. It's involved in sleep onset. When your serotonin's high, you want to just basically, you get you want to like lie down and sleep.
Yeah.
Feel like your energy was taken right out of your body. In fact, there was a big controversy in sports nutrition because they were saying that eating carbohydrates would stimulate the uptake of amino acids into muscle, except for one, tryptophan, which is a small amino. The tryptophan would then enter. This is basically applied to endurance athletes. The tryptophan would then have free entry into the brain because you have to understand amino acids compete with each other for uptake. They have what they call amino acid carriers. And if you eat, let's say, carbohydrates, you'll get an insulin release. The insulin will push most of the other amino acids into the muscle, but tryptophan, because of its smaller structure, will not be affected. It'll go from the blood into the brain, where to be converted to serotonin and produce a feeling of premature fatigue. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I do say
So,
that.
so for a while, they were saying the antidote to that is to take the amino acids that compete with tryptophan to prevent tryptophan from entering the brain during exercise. Those amino acids are the branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. But it turns out that that's kind of theory. That was a kind of a hypothesis. It's been dismissed. Nobody really believes that anymore. So
Okay, I got to make it clear because my wife sent me a text. When I mention babe, I'm talking to my beautiful wife in the other room because it's kind of misdirected. Nobody knows who I'm talking to. I'm talking to Cindy out there when I mention the word babe, folks. So
Eric, say that?
that's really where I'm coming from. Although in base, when I played ball, basketball, anything else, all the guys, come on, babe, come on, babe. It was considered a kind of
Yeah,
masculine thing, but yes.
sure.
Let me ask you this. Why do foods begin to react differently on one's body when, years before it was a primary source in their diet? Now they can't stomach it. Do you develop allergies along the way or sensitivities as you grow older?
Not necessarily allergies. It's just the way your body handles the food. It might have to do with, let's say, a decrease of certain hormones, uh, gastrointestinal hormones, neurotransmitter. All these things tend to change with age, and so does your response to the food. For example, myself, my father, both my grandfathers had diabetes. My father died from complications of diabetes, had it for many years. And because of the genetics, I was predestined to get diabetes unless I did something, unless I did preemptive measures, which I did by exercising, not eating a lot of carbohydrates, trying to keep my body fat as low as I can. However, I've noticed that in kind of relation to what you're saying, I never had any problems with blood glucose levels until I hit like 55 years of age. Then suddenly I started noticing because my blood glucose, when I checked it, was elevated. In other words, your normal blood glucose is normal resting blood glucose is 100 or less. Suddenly, even though I was still exercising and doing everything right, my blood glucose started to go up to like 110, 115. And I quickly realized that's insulin insensitivity. It's also called prediabetes. And I said to myself, wait a minute. I've been working out all this time. I don't eat a lot of, I don't eat refined, I very rarely eat refined. Yes, I have, my favorite food is pizza. So I have pizza maybe once a week, but that wouldn't account for it. And suddenly it dawned on me, it was an age related thing. In other words, my blood glucose, in other words, my genetics for diabetes, regardless of my training and diet, were kicking in, right? At this say late middle age. And it doesn't mean that I'm doomed to get type 2 diabetes. What it means is I have to be more careful now. In other words, I have to really control my carbohydrate intake. And I have to always, what I found for myself, a really good combination for blood glucose control is a combination of resistance exercise and aerobics. If I do resistance training alone, your muscles can uptake glucose without insulin. That's one of the great things about muscle. You don't need it. It's the greatest, let's say, uptake mechanism for glucose there is. That's one of the benefits of exercise. But when you do the aerobics, it's a synergistic effect that works even better. You get a greater response of glucose carriers like GLUT4, it's called. And the net effect is that even if you're insulin resistant, like me, you can control it and keep the blood glucose. Anyway, but it's just there's a guy who does videos. He calls it glucose.
Yeah. You see that all the time. These geniuses out there.
Right. But the thing is, I found that through my personal experience that I can keep it under control. Where even though I'm technically insulin insensitive, I could keep my blood glucose normal. And now, here's the interesting thing: if I do resistance training alone, it's not as effective. In other words, no matter how hard I train, the next day, because I do eat some carbohydrate, after the workout for some glycogen replenishment. The next day, my blood glucose, if I don't do the aerobics, sure enough, it's like 105, 110. If I do,
I find the exact thing with myself, the same exact thing. And also, I can transform my physique from one day to the next sometimes. I'll look in that when I just do just weight training, Jerry, and no cardio, no physical activity other than lifting those weights. My body is nothing like if I combine both. It's night and day. And if I cut the carbohydrates, because I've been doing this forever, cut the carbohydrates just one day, by about day and a half, everything pops and I look like a different guy in the mirror. it's fascinating the way the human body is in that kind of
Oh, yeah, yeah.
short period of time.
Right. But in other words, I found that, this is a lesson for other people that might be in the same position. If you really are, let's say, have the genetics for diabetes, and I'm not going to lie, the truth is that the less body fat you have, the less insulin, the greater your insulin sensitivity. If I went down to, let's say under 10% body fat, I probably would have no insulin sensitivity at all. I'll be honest with you. It's true. I'm trying to do that. It's not so easy, but a lot of times your body composition has a lot to do with it, but you still have that genetic factor.
Mm.
All I know, even if I was 7% body fat, which would make me rip, by the way. I mean, you hear about all these figures. This guy's saying he's 1% fat.
7%
Oh,
is
bullshit.
yeah.
Bullshit. Let me tell you something. If you're 7% fat, just to give you an idea, a man 15% fat is considered normal for a lean, fit man. But 15% fat,
You're saying 15, right?
15, 1 5.
Okay.
You don't have any hanging fat. You don't have much muscle definition, but there's no superfluous fat, like you don't have fat hanging over your waist or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the lower your body fat, the greater the muscle definition, the more abdominals, the abdominal definition comes out. A man who is 7% fat is going to be ripped. In other words,
No doubt.
he's going to see muscle striations. The most muscular bodybuilder I ever interviewed was a guy named Andreas Munzer, who passed away. He died. Another guy.
I know that name.
He died of something like 32 years old. Massive.
Very young.
Yeah, he died. His body, when they opened him up, the doctors almost fell on the floor. They couldn't believe what he was. He was basically destroyed internally. Great guy. I interviewed him a couple of times, and I interviewed a very quiet, nice guy. And I looked at the guy just moving around. Striations were jumping up and down on his arm. I mean, he looked like a human anatomy chart. And I said, Andreas, I said, did you ever measure your body fat? And I figured, here's a guy for sure.
Ripped to shreds.
Yeah, you couldn't get more ripped than this guy was. He had literally no even in his autopsy, they commented no superficial body fat found, no subcutaneous fat at all. That is as ripped as you could get. I said to him, Andreas, have you ever had your body fat tested? He says, yes. And I figured, well, here's a guy. If he tells me 2% fat, I'm going to believe it.
Yeah.
You know what the lowest his body fat ever got?
7.
5.
5.
He was 5. Now, if he was 5% fat, all these other guys who are claiming 3%, 2%, I'll put it bluntly, they're full of shit.
Yeah.
They're full of shit because none of them have the muscularity this guy had.
And that's unhealthy.
Oh, it is.
I was weighed down probably about 7, I would say. I never got a measure, but I would gather to say I was very, very ripped. I didn't feel too well.
Well, here's the thing.
And I'm not that much. Maybe I'm 9 or 10 now, maybe a little bit lower. But I mean, I didn't feel well. It's not a natural state.
Well, let me tell you something. They have something in biology or physiology. It's called essential body fat. In women, I believe the essential body fat it could be as much as maybe 18 to 20%. In men, it's 3. No, I'm sorry. I think it's something like 12% women. And in men, it's 3%. Meaning, what does that mean? Essential body fat. That's the body fat your body needs to basically keep you alive. This is, you have the myelin sheath that surrounds your nerves, like insulation for your nerve. That's kind of made from fat, right? And B12 is involved. The things that hold your organs in place, so your kidneys, it's fat, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, you have to have your brain has a certain amount of fat and support. So you have to have a certain amount of fat. Now you might say, well, what happens if you go below 3% essential fat? Okay, your body doesn't want you to go below 3% fat, so it's going to do everything it can to prevent you from losing fat past that point. So where is it going to get energy from? Not from the essential fat, but guess where? Your muscles.
Of course.
That's what they showed. They showed in studies with Navy SEALs. Some of these guys actually started to get below 3% fat, and they started to lose muscle like crazy. Like they were very catabolic. The muscles were disappearing. So that's another thing to consider. I mean, in all due respect to Ronnie Coleman, who's one of the great bodybuilders, I've seen him in interviews. when he said that, I can't help laughing. He said his body fat was measured at 0.1%. Well, let me put it to you this way. You have fat that's in your bone marrow, right?
Uh-huh.
A guy with zero, a skeleton has
Yeah.
more fat. A skeleton, no skin, no tissue. A skeleton has more fat than 0.1%.
Uh-huh.
He said when he weighed 330 pounds, if you can look at videos on YouTube of him guest posing, he looked enormous. His stomach was out to here.
Yeah.
I mean, he was undoubtedly muscle, but he also huge stomach. He claimed in those exhibitions he was 3% fat.
Well, you can say anything, and those stomachs are a big turnoff.
Right, right.
I cannot stand that. When they turn profile, it's terrible.
And here's the thing: I'm not going to say that Ronnie Coleman is a liar because I don't know
Right. He may
I
be
don't,
misinformed.
he's misinformed, or people who measured him might have done it wrong. Where because the man has a lot of muscle, and the thing about body composition tests, it's a little bit more difficult to get accurate fat measurements from a guy who has a tremendous amount of muscle because muscle is 72% water, and it interferes with some of these fat tests like the underwater weighing. It's a little bit trickier to get them. So I think that he was, as you said, misled. I don't
Yeah.
think he's purposely lying. I think but there's no freaking way that he was 0 point. He'd be dead.
I was going to say it's impossible.
Impossible.
As soon as you look at it, you got to laugh at it. But here's one for you out of the box. What do you think about these ridiculous tattoos? I'm a guy with no tattoos, so I can talk. Now, if your goal is to develop muscle definition, so on and so forth, why would you put these blotches on your body to cover that? If you work so hard to get it, you answer that. If you could answer that, you'd be setting everybody straight.
It makes no sense to me at all because, as you point out, tattoos obscure muscle definition. Why would you try? For example, I've seen guys with really well-defined deltoid muscles, the shoulder muscles, yet they have these big tattoo dragons or
Like
whatever.
blotch, like an ink
And
blotch.
you can't see the definition. Not only could you not see it from if you're sitting in the audience, even if you stand next to him, you can't see that because it's
Yeah.
completely hidden by the ink. I'll tell you a little anecdote. There was a bodybuilder in the 70s named Ron Tufeld.
I know the name.
Yeah, he plays a really nice guy. Yeah, he did very well. He almost won the Mr. America a couple of times. Shorter guy, very stocky, but very unbelievable abdominal development. Anyway, I got to know him when he came to California. He was one of the guys, one of the first guys to have he had a big tattoo on his shoulder. And he was losing to guys, even though he felt he was more muscular and had a better physique. And he came up to me in the gym one day. He says, Jerry, I think I'm losing because of my tattoo. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, look, it's you can't see my shoulder development.
Yeah.
So I said, well, what are you going to do, Ron? I mean, you got to. He says, I'm going to have it removed. Now, in those days, the tattoo removal was very, very rudimentary, very bad. He came back and he had it removed, but I'll tell you, I'll never forget it. It looked like he had a serious burn scar. I mean, it was
terrible.
It literally deformed the skin on his shoulder, unfortunately. So, in other words, this is a guy who recognized that tattoos were hurting him. And I see, call me old fashioned, a curmudgeon, whatever.
Me too.
But listen, when I see, it's bad enough for the guys, but when I see women, with tattoos all over the body, like the Illustrated Man, Ray Bradbury's favorite story, I got to tell you, it literally makes me puke. I find it so fucking ugly.
It's just such a shame.
And
it's such a shame to do that to your body.
But I've seen beautiful women, Ralph, beautiful, where they what is it called? The word I'm looking for. They have tattoos all over their arms.
That body art.
Yeah, they call it body art. They think it looks good, but I mean it just looks horrible. It degrades to them. A woman with this beautiful face with all those tattoos, she might as well weigh 600 pounds with bad skin and no teeth.
I guess it's all in the eye of the beholder because people love that stuff, but not me. As we close, and I hate to do that, I could talk for about 3 hours, but I'll give you some categories if you would, and you tell me the guy that comes to mind first. The best poser you've ever seen.
The best poser I've ever seen, I would say, is let me think. Hold on. It's a toss up between two bodybuilders, Lee Labrada. I'm sorry, there's three that I would come to mind. Lee Labrada, they have different styles. That's why I have to pick three. Lee Labrada was almost balletic in his movements. I mean, I mentioned in a recent interview how Lee Labrada, you can have somebody go to a contest, have no interest in bodybuilding, not even
I
like
appreciate it.
right? But when they see Lee Labrada pose, it was so artistic and so graceful, his movements, that they were actually mesmerized. It looked like it's kind of a dance almost, the way he
Yeah.
moved. Then there was a guy named Mohammed Makawi who goes back a little earlier, a little short Egyptian guy. Same thing, beautiful flow. He just look again. It looked really good. And then there was a guy, a more recent guy, Melvin Anthony, friend of mine, who was a pro bodybuilder. He was a different type of poser. He was able to do acrobatic moves and dance moves that looked so professional that again, it was entertaining, even for somebody that had zero interest in bodybuilding.
You either have that or you don't. You can't
You know,
teach that.
no, these guys worked at it. No, these
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, no, of course they hone their skills, but if you don't have any rhythm, you don't have any rhythm. Because I see some of these guys, they're kind of robotic on stage.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are terrible poses.
Unless they're trying to be, they do this robotic kind of a posing thing. I've seen that too. Here's one for you. The guy who developed so beautifully, but did the least amount of work to get there. A guy that goofed off at the gym, but you'd never know it by the physique.
You want me to give you a name on that?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't call it goofing off, but Sergio Oliva, which was considered one of the greatest bodybuilders of all, had no idea what he was doing. Did everything wrong. I mean, he trained wrong. He overtrained. He used to drink quarts of Coca-Cola. His own son told me that. Never, ever followed any kind of diet when training. And this guy was the elite him and Arnold were rivals.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he never did anything right. He did everything wrong. What he did, let me put it this way. What he did, if any normal mortal person tried to follow his routine, they would look like shit. I guarantee it. Absolute shit. He was just a genetic phenomenon. And I always say, I didn't like Sergio as a man. I had a couple of run-ins with him. I won't go into detail, but as a bodybuilder, to me, he was unbelievable. I would list him as number one, even above Ronnie Coleman, as the most genetically gifted bodybuilder who ever lived. He had this tiny waist, right? If he had, it scares me to think of what this guy would have looked like if two things had happened: if he had trained and dieted correctly, and if he had used the drugs the guys use today. Scary.
He was always a notch below Arnold.
Yeah, I mean, in one contest, he actually deserved to beat Arnold.
He did, but they never saw it his way.
Well, no, it was in Germany, and the promoter of the show was Arnold's one of Arnold's.
Oh, okay. Well, the fix was in.
Yeah, but yeah, everybody else in the contest, all the other competitors, told me, off the record, that Sergio definitely. If you look at photos, Sergio did look better than Arnold that year.
The most eccentric.
Oh, the most eccentric. Gee, that encompasses.
It's everybody. You got about 10 or 12 or 15 or 100.
That's a real hard one to answer, Ralph. You got to let
it. First one that comes to mind. The most, you go to the gym and you find him hanging from the rafters. I don't know. The most eccentric.
Well, there was one guy, nice guy, a friend of mine. He competed. He actually won the Arnold contest a couple of years ago. A guy named Mike Ashley. Now, Mike is a very intelligent guy. He was a natural bodybuilder. Nobody believes it, but I believe it, and I can tell you why in a second. Every time people see pictures, they say, no way, this guy's a liar. There's no way he's a natty, which I hate that term, by the way.
Yeah, natty.
In other words, he's natural. I believe he is, and I'll tell you why. This guy was fanatical. I've never seen a bodybuilder so I interviewed him. I was on the road and we were in Europe. He was competing in a series of pro contests in Europe. And I went to his room to interview him. And he says, Jerry, you mind if I eat something? I said, okay, let's go down to he says, no, I don't eat in restaurants. I bring my own food.
Yeah.
And brought out this Tupperware container, right? Yeah. I don't remember what it contained. Obviously, it was something like pure protein or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe vegetables. He took out a scale, Ralph. He had a little scale. And he weighed each morsel of food. And, and in other words, he told me, he says, I never eat in restaurant. I will not eat in restaurant food. I said, do you weigh all your food? He says, I weigh every
ounce.
every ounce, everything. I always bring my scale with me. I've never, in all the bodybuilders, thousands, I've never seen any bodybuilder that conscientious. And the fact that he did that, plus he was genetically gifted, he was genetically gifted. I believe, and he was also an intelligent guy. He had a really good knowledge of nutrition, much more advanced. He actually worked with researchers at the University of Arizona. They actually used him as a case study in a medical journal. So, he consulted with real true medical professionals. So, if you combine the whole picture, I believe he was natural. I do. In his case, I believe he was natural. But he was kind of strange in that he was so meticulous.
Last one, the brightest, the smartest, the guy who was just a genius. Did he exist?
No, again,
Frank
that's
Zane notwithstanding. Let's not say Zane, I know Zane's intelligence. I just saw Zane, as a matter of fact, you'd never know he ever lifted a weight in his life.
right.
I know he's 80 years old. Oh my
Zane,
goodness, he's thin as a rail, and I
Zane,
can't believe it, but he's 80.
Zane has something called sarcopenia. It's a muscle loss.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, he doesn't know it himself. But the thing is, I can
Oh,
see the way he looks, he does. Frank Zane is as you say, he has the degrees in psychology and mathematics. He's a smart guy. I know him very well. I lived next door to him for a year. But unfortunately, Zane has a lot of mistaken notions, and I cannot, because of that, put him in my top, let's say, three of most intelligent bodybuilders. Mike Mensa was a very intelligent guy, but also had a lot of weird ideas.
self-destructive though,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Self-destructive that would keep him out of the running. Let me think. Who would I think? There's a couple of MDs that I knew over the years. But again, there's a guy named C.F. Smith, who was a national elite bodybuilder, but also was a little bit crazy, screwed up mentally. Maybe at that, maybe he's not anymore. I don't know. But, let me think.
It's a tough one to come up with somebody, but you just gave me three good ones.
Yeah,
I saw a guy, the zaniest guy, the off the wall guy is a guy named Andreas Cowley.
oh, Andreas. Yeah, I know.
And do you know him personally?
I know him very well.
I saw him on Rick's show, who passed away sadly,
Yeah,
Rick Drayson.
yeah.
And he's out there. He's on the show in a panel situation. He's posing. He's got this string tank shirt on. And you got to say to he's bald now. He had a wonderful head of hair back in the old days, and they changed their look so much. But the fun, the lifting of the weights. If they ever took the lifting of the weights away from that guy, he would never know what to do during the course of a day.
Wait, I just gave you a name. I just thought of a guy who I would say kind of like a Renaissance man, meaning he was a top bodybuilder, became a professor, very intelligent. Happens to be a close friend of mine, a guy named Richard Baldwin.
Mm,
I would list him
I don't know that name.
yeah, he was top bodybuilder in the 70s, won a lot of contests. He went on to become a professor in Florida. He's now retired. I would list him as definitely in the top three of the most intelligent bodybuilders ever. He's very well spoken. He's very literate. He's definitely in the top three.
It's a beautiful sport. It's too bad when done in excess, it's a deadly sport. How we
Yeah.
started this interview, because I see these, and again, it's supposed to be geared around health. It's not supposed to be just look good at all costs. But the way it's judged and the way things go, no matter what you do to get to this level, just do it. That's the mindset. Just do it. Doesn't matter if you're going to live. If you live to 30, that's fine. If you win a few titles now, that's the mindset I seem to see in 2024.
Well, you see, the thing that people always overlook, especially the public, is they have this idea that bodybuilding is inherently dangerous. And that's so far from the truth. The research on resistance training has burgeoned. I mean, burgeoned in the last, let's say, 30 years. Whereas before that, everything in sports science focused on endurance activities. They kind of put weight training, it's nothing,
Yeah.
doesn't really do anything for it. But they began to realize weight training does a lot, or resistance exercise does a lot of things that are not obtainable by, let's say, aerobic or endurance training, has tremendous benefits. In fact, I'll go so far as to say, if a human being, now you notice I'm being really general here, I'm saying
Mhm.
human being, if a human being doesn't engage in some form of resistance training as they get older, they will inevitably get sarcopenia, which is the age-related loss of muscle, which has an extremely close relationship to mortality. In other words, when your muscles go, everything starts to break down. Your brain, everything goes. So the people who don't do some sort of resistance training, they don't have to go to the gym and lift weights, but they have to do some kind of, like you said, push-ups. You could do
Yeah.
free hand exercises. You could do the rubber band things, whatever they call
Yeah,
it.
whatever you do, just put some resistance on
Put
those
some
muscles.
resistance, or you can even do the old what's it called, Charles Atlas thing.
Oh
When you,
yeah, yeah, whatever that was called. Yeah, I had one
yeah,
of those.
your muscles respond to tension. That's what makes muscles grow. The number one stimulus for muscle growth is what they call mechanical tension.
Hmm.
Tension on the muscles is what make so whatever way you want to apply the tension, do it. That will keep your muscles alive, and it'll go a long way. Because if you don't, you will. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your genetics. I don't care if you had parents that lived to 190. You're going to get sarcopenia. It's
That's what I
inevitable.
wonder about guys like Zane, guys like Columbo. Why did they stop? You
No,
don't have to train like you used to train. Nobody does that, but they could
no,
have done something. Why?
no,
Why do you think Zane? Why do you think Zane stopped?
he didn't stop.
Oh,
Zane,
because he looks like he stopped.
no, Zane says in interviews, he says he's still
He's full of it because if you see him, you can't. He would maintain some mass. He's got nothing. He's got a little
no,
belly, and
yeah.
he's very thin over
Well,
through.
Zane trains. I heard him in an interview. He still trains 3 days on, 1 day off, which is
Okay.
exactly what I do. In other words, that's a pretty frequent training. He has a very well equipped home gym. I believe he trains people there. He still trains people. But the thing about Zane is Frank has some weird ideas. I heard him say in an interview, the woman interviewing happened to be a university professor. She said, Frank, at the time, Frank was something like 78 years old. She says, Frank, do you, as an older man, what do you think about testosterone therapy? Do you use testosterone yourself? He says, not only do I not use testosterone replacement therapy, I take things to purposely lower my testosterone because I believe testosterone causes prostate cancer. I had to say something. The same woman had interviewed me.
Yeah.
So I wrote a comment. I said, in
Uh-huh.
all due respect to Frank, an old friend of mine, he's dead wrong about testosterone causing it's dead wrong. Furthermore, if a man is low and this goes for any man, if you are genuinely low in testosterone, and the truth is, not every man is. I mean, you might have you sitting there, Frank, since you're nice and lean, you might have a testosterone level equal to men that are 20 years old
You
without
think that's possible at
very
63?
possible. Yeah, because a lot of, especially when you're older, a lot of older men's testosterone. I'm not trying to say you're older man, but
Yeah,
no,
no, I am.
say,
Believe me.
well, let's say past 40 to make it more
Right.
polite. A lot of your testosterone level is based on your body fat, your body composition. I've seen men who have, let's say, are clinically low testosterone, as shown by lab tests. They have high body fat levels. They go on a diet, they exercise, don't take any testosterone, no steroids. They go back within about 3 months, they have normal testosterone levels.
Mm.
Body fat keeps your testosterone level low. Now, in Zane's case, if like I say, only 50%, about 50% of men over 40 have what they call clinically low testosterone levels. It's up to them where they want to take it now. The consensus among medical professionals is if you don't have any symptoms of
Hmm.
low testosterone, you have to understand the big pharma, they're always trying to get guys on testosterone. They exaggerate it. But the point is, let's say you are, and I've met men like this. Let's say you take a lab test and you actually have low testosterone. But I say to you, hey, Ralph, do you have any of these? Are you depressed? Are you
Yeah.
losing muscle? Are you getting more fat around your waist? Are you tired? And you say, no, I'm not feeling any of that. And then you say to me, well, Jerry, I showed low testosterone. Should I get on testosterone? I'd say no. You get on low testosterone where you're having symptoms.
Symptoms.
You
That
don't
that's
get
the
on it just for the hell of it.
yeah, but
Like
many people do it. They take one
oh,
size fits all.
98, I'd say 90% of men feel that when they hit 40, something happens where they have to automatically get on testosterone. That's bullshit.
Well, the great thing about you is that you ruin these myths, and you tell the truth here about what people, the misapprehensions people are under all the time. That's where they get in trouble. I mean, if you're bombarded with all this, we use the word a lot tonight, folks, bullshit information, you're bound to buy some of it, and if you buy some of it, then you go down the wrong road.
And there's one other thing I want to say in defense of Zayn now.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know Frank well enough to say he's low T, low test. I don't know.
Yeah.
If he is, and since he says he takes things that purposely lowers testosterone, at 80 years old, the odds are that he is low testosterone. That would account for a lot of this, his sarcopenia that he obviously shows. But in defense of Frank, I have to add, just to be scientifically accurate, I don't care who you are, whether you're Ronnie Coleman, Dorian Yates, makes no difference. You can't stop. As you get older, there's a point where you're going to lose some muscle. It's impossible. Even if you work out, you do everything right.
You're still going to.
You look at Arnold today. I mean, Arnold doesn't train like he used to, but I mean, I saw a video just like 2 hours ago before I spoke to you. Arnold sitting there, and and for the first time ever, I have actually bigger arms than Arnold. I
saw his arms recently.
I never thought I'd be able to say that.
There you go. It took many years, but you made it.
Because the Arnold I knew in his prime, his arms were twice as big as mine.
Well, Ferrigno suffers from the same thing. The triceps. Do you see his triceps?
Yeah, but see, you have to understand, it's not the fault of Arnold or Lou or Dorian or any of these people. That's an age. It's inevitable. These guys, and Frank, they're still working out. But there's things that happen, like you get a loss of what they call motor neurons, maybe the satellite cells, the muscle stem cells, which are to maintain muscle cells. Maybe they start to die off. There's a lot of things where you could, here's the point to remember, with regular resistance training, you can maintain a good percentage of your muscle, and it's vital to maintain a good, but you're not going to have the same muscle at 70 years old as you had when you were 30. Nobody's going to have that. And you might, there's a couple of what they call outliers. You might have seen these guys. There's a couple of guys, I've seen them in, what's it called again? What's the name of that social?
Instagram.
Instagram. I've seen some of them. These guys are huge. They claim to be 65 years of age, and they still have huge muscles. I'm not sure what's going on. I would say
I've seen a few of those guys.
Yeah, no, they're real. I'm sure that they're on a shitload of steroids for one thing. That's because they would not have that kind of muscle size without at 65. No way, impossible. The second thing is they're genetic freaks also. They have some sort of proclivity where they're able to maintain much, but they are a rarity. They're like, like finding pearls and oysters. You know what I mean? They're very rare. Most men don't fall into that category. Most men, even elite bodybuilders, are going to lose a certain amount of muscle. It's inevitable with age. So, a guy like Frank, Arnold, Lou, there's no way they could look like they did when they were in their 30s.
Where can we find your great stuff so people can tune into you regularly?
Well, of course, there's my YouTube channel, Jerry Brainum channel on YouTube. That's completely free. I post new videos every Tuesday. But if you really want in-depth information, honest truth, I would tell people to subscribe to my Applied Metabolics. It's www.appliedmetabolics.com. It's extremely in-depth. I cover a lot of the topics we covered today. I cover a lot of I just did a huge article, for example, on the benefits of extra virgin olive oil. And there's a lot of information on extra virgin olive oil. I mean, you can see there's like 30,000 videos on extra virgin olive oil. But here's the difference. My article talks about things that aren't in the videos, are not in the article. I find stuff that very few people know about the benefits of extra virgin olive. And that goes from all my articles. In other words, there's similar topics you could find, let's say, in videos, on internet blogs, but none of them, my stuff has stuff that my articles contain information that's not in those other articles. That's the real advantage. And as a professional writer for over half a century, I know how to write for the public, because I'll tell you, Ralph, I've seen a lot of these other digital publications.
Yeah.
I've read it, and the guys are knowledgeable, don't they? I'm not saying.
Yeah, they are.
There are. These guys have PhDs, and they're smart guys. but they're not writers. This stuff is
You're
really
right.
hard.
They can't. Oh, they cannot write.
They can't write.
Oh,
Let me
it's
tell you,
laughable how they write.
some of them read like PhD, doctorate dissertation. And believe me, unless you have a science background, you're not gonna be. You're gonna
I
get.
know you're just a lot of gobbledygook that you can't
Yeah.
comprehend.
And after one paragraph, you're gonna just
You're gonna
turn.
nod off.
You're not off exactly.
No,
So,
you're so right. It has to be palatable for the ordinary
yeah,
guy to read the thing.
yeah.
No, you're so right. You know, Joe, you're top notch, and I do appreciate it. And we got to do this, every few months because it's a wealth of knowledge, man. Thank you.
Sure. Good to see you, Ralph. Take care.
Great to see you. You take care of yourself. Have a good evening, okay?
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay.